I wish I could open this lecture by fully sharing with you a remarkable essay by John DeGatta. The essay, Notes Toward the Making of a Whole Human Being, appears in DeGatta's collection of essays, Halls of Fame, published in 2001. I even wish I could just share with you the first sentence of this essay, but I can't. You see, the first sentence is the entire essay, or to put this another way, the entire essay consists of a single marvelous suspensive sentence. On page 151, DeGatta jumps right into that sentence, actually offering it as a continuation of his title, Notes Toward the Making of a Whole Human Being, or Deep Springs, being the incredible true story of 25 boys and their struggles to attain both bodies and souls at a small desert college in the American West, considered by some the best in the U.S., for which young men at 18 are plucked from the East and delivered to a campus surrounded by mountains the size of Manhattan. On page 155, DeGatta finally brings the many digressive flights of this monster sentence back to earth. Like holes in a map that is used too much, opened and folded, worn slowly down, torn and shredded, sinking continents along creases, draining whole seas, postponing America's great myth of frontier as observed by the author, a former student and friend assigned to tend the garden in this desert, is strange. Got it? 4 pages of subject finally allow the reader, after interminable delay, to get to the verb, is strange. Boil that sentence down to a base clause and it reads, the incredible true story of 25 boys is strange. Of course, that base clause reveals almost nothing of the real concerns of this suspensive essay, among which is its own extended form. Noting that the boys at the school tend to favor long sentences in their writing and in their speeches, DeGatta suggests that the experience of this odd school may itself somehow resemble the experience of the periodic sentence. In DeGatta's contemplation of the affective dimensions of suspensive syntax, I find exactly the kind of thoughtful, meaningful consideration that has so long been missing from the discourse of sentence structure in writing texts. Indeed, DeGatta's self-reflexive experiment with a massive periodic sentence should serve as an exciting model for taking suspensive syntax seriously, for exploring what it actually does, rather than for the thought-stopping normative claims that simply tell us it is a sign of a writer's mastery and sophistication. All of DeGatta's essays are interesting. This one is fascinating. But for now, we need to return to more mechanical concerns to survey some of the nuts and bolts strategies that actually produce suspensive sentences. In the last lecture, I noted that various delaying tactics mark the periodic/suspensive sentence, giving it a dramatic quality, a sense of its constituent parts being juggled or scrambled until the very last moment, finally falling into place at the very end of the sentence, resolved by the verb or modifier that allows us to process the information that has come before. 5 broad tactics prevail, 2 of them relying on modifiers to delay completion of the base clause, 2 using initial clauses or phrases either as modifiers or as extended subjects, and 1 balancing a second clause against a first, the 2 clauses linked by a semicolon, the classic structure of the balanced sentence. First tactic. An inverted cumulative works periodically, forestalling the base clause by a number of modifying levels, keeping the distinctive cumulative rhythm, but putting it to suspensive effect. Here's an example. His eyes weary from the road, his clothes tattered and dusty, his beard long and unkempt, looking as if not only insects but small animals might be nesting within its scraggly strands, Robert Coover's Wayfarer, the enigmatic protagonist of one of the many narratives in 7 exemplary fictions, is hardly a character designed to attract our sympathy. Second tactic. Completion of the base clause can also be delayed by interposing, modifying, or qualifying material between the subject and the verb of the sentence, a splitting tactic that runs the risk of losing or alienating the reader. This is easily the least controlled or focused periodic form. This strategy, splitting the subject from the verb by interposing everything but the kitchen sink between them, bears more than a passing resemblance to Mark Twain's description of the way the German language works, or doesn't work. As Twain put it in one of his speeches, "A verb has a hard enough time of it in this world when it is all together. It's downright inhuman to split it up. But that's what those Germans do. They take part of a verb and put it down here like a steak, and they take the other part of it and put it away over yonder like another steak, and between these two limits they just shovel in German." Well, that's pretty much what this kind of suspensive strategy calls for, shoveling in anything and everything between the subject and the verb. Consider this example. The old mayor, after waving to the assembled reporters, a small crowd of harried, cynical-looking men and one stunningly calm-looking young woman, after whispering something in the ear of his sickly, grinning administrative assistant, and after flashing a hollow version of his famed triumphant smile, a smile clearly patterned after that of Franklin Roosevelt's, and his equally well-known circle the wagons wave of his index finger, strode into the courtroom to play out the final act of his personal tragedy. In a room of one's own, Virginia Woolf turns this process on its head by inverting the subject and verb of the following sentence, but still keeping the verb apart from the subject by interposing all manner of exquisitely precise delaying information. "And thus by degrees was lit halfway down the spine, which is the seat of the soul, not that hard little electric light which we call brilliance as it pops in and out upon our lips, but the more profound, subtle, and subterranean glow, which is the rich yellow flame of rational discourse." Here's another inversion. "In a small tar paper shack, a forlornly leaning eyesore on the edge of the city dump, farthest from the fly-guarded entrance, lives a curiously dignified, almost majestically independent, 80-year-old retired garbage man, the unlikely hero of this story." Third tactic. Initial qualifying constructions lead to more complicated periodic structures, presenting information that becomes complete, safe to accept as final, only when joined with or reassessed in light of information in the base clause, a process signaled by opening words such as although, even, or if. Now, there are a number of conditional constructions that lead to suspensive sentences. The most obvious of these is the conditional sentence that opens with the word if. Here's Texas Monthly writer Joe Nick Petoskey's conditional suspensive. "If you're at Big Bend Ranch State Park, you look for David Alloway, quick." It turns out that Alloway is a survival skills ranger, and Big Bend is a place where survival skills are more than an academic concern. And that final quick should also remind us of the suspensive phenomenon where the final word of the sentence receives extra emphasis either from a colon or from a totally unexpected final turn that serves to put in a new light what has come before. Here's another example. "If it can be proved that UFOs exist, and if it is revealed that the U.S. government has indeed hidden evidence of extraterrestrial visitors, and even if it turns out that Bigfoot and Elvis do not live outside its lurid pages, the contribution of the Weekly World News to the history of journalism may have to be reassessed." And here's an impressive use of conditionals to add emphasis to a feminist critique. "If I mow the lawn every Saturday, edge it to perfection, and celebrate my victory over nature with a beer, if I stay on the pot for 20 minutes reading Sports Illustrated and return to the world bellowing a warning to stay clear of that end of the house, If I cuss and smoke and embarrass my friends with dirty jokes, then laugh uproariously, if I play baseball in the park and spit out the car window 2 or 3 times on my way home without hitting my own car, I still won't be treated as an equal. Starting a sentence with either since or because will also always create some degree of suspense. Here's a wonderful example from Virginia Woolf. Since he belonged, even at the age of 6, to that great clan which cannot keep this feeling separate from that, but must let future prospects with their joys and sorrows cloud what is actually at hand, since to such people, even in earliest childhood, any turn in the wheel of sensation has the power to crystallize and transfix the moment upon which its gloom or radiance rests, James Ramsay, sitting on the floor cutting out pictures from the illustrated catalog of the Army and Navy stores, endowed the picture of a refrigerator, as his mother spoke, with heavenly bliss. That, of course, from Woolf's To the Lighthouse. Although and when, if used to indicate the satisfaction of a condition, also create suspensive sentences. Although I'm not disposed to maintain that being born in a workhouse is in itself the most fortunate and enviable circumstance that can possibly befall a human being, I do mean to say that in this particular instance it was the best thing for Oliver Twist that could by possibility have occurred. And then we have another set of conditionals that are preceded by elaborations on the word even when, even while, even if. Here's an example. Even while I was trying to plug up the leak, desperately trying to wrap the ruptured pipe with duct tape and towels, yelling for my son to cut the water off to the house, wildly looking around for any container that might catch at least some of the spurting water, I knew that my efforts were doomed to fail and that soon my basement would become Iowa City's newest wading pool. Another even example. Even if I sort my mail into efficient piles based on the importance of the letter and the degree of urgency and deadlines for response, even if I tell myself to open mail at once and then put it in piles, even if I keep my mail in ever larger plastic bins, I simply cannot keep from losing bills, never opening invitations, and generally proving myself hopelessly inept in what should be one of life's less demanding responsibilities. Indeed, there are any number of left-branching sentences that open with qualifying phrases or just plain prepositional phrases that will produce significant degrees of suspense, as we might remember is the case with the lyrics to My Darling Clementine, which begins, in a cavern, in a canyon, excavating for a mine. And Michael Chabon's first sentence in The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay offers a somewhat more literary example. In later years, holding forth to an interviewer or to an audience of aging fans at a comic book convention, Sam Clay liked to declare, apropos of his and Joe Cavalier's creation, that back when he was a boy, sealed and hogtied inside the airtight vessel known as Brooklyn, New York, he had been haunted by dreams of Harry Houdini. Fourth tactic. An extended subject produces similar results, initially offering an infinitive or relative clause, bringing the sentence into focus only when it becomes clear that what at first may have looked like a complete sentence is actually no more than the subject of a much, much longer sentence. Herbert Reed includes in his chapter on the sentence in his study English Prose Style a suspensive sentence of this kind from William Wordsworth's convention of Sintra. It opens with the history of all ages and then seems to proceed to inventory all historical phenomena for some 280 words before completing a base clause that finally reads, the history of all ages demonstrates incontestably that the passions of men do immeasurably transcend their objects. I know that description doesn't give you a very clear sense of the sentence, but believe me, You should thank me for not making you listen to what a 280-word subject sounds like, and that from a poet. But I will remind you of the much longer sentence I made by taking Nick Carraway's wonderfully suspended description of the East as having a quality of distortion, and simply making Nick's sentence the subject of my sentence, with my last word coming full circle and also emphasizing distortion, just as did Fitzgerald's original sentence. I suspect Aristotle had something like this in mind when he claimed that the periodic sentence was characterized by some form of turning about. Somewhat similarly, starting a sentence with an infinitive as a subject will always produce some degree of suspense, as Hamlet reminds us with his "to be or not to be." That is the question. Karl Klaus gives us a slightly less weighty example. To come all this way, to arrive after dark, to find the village completely abandoned, Tarzan nowhere in sight, and the banana trees stripped bare, left Cheetah feeling completely nonplussed. As does Jim Velas, who uses a second one-word sentence in place of the colon we previously noted as an intensifying device at the end of the sentence. Here's his sentence. Two sentences, actually. To know about fried chicken, you have to have been weaned and reared on it in the South. Period. Final tactic. A possible fifth category of suspensive sentence must be recognized. The sentence whose message is interrupted by a colon or a semicolon, but inexorably deflating, inverting, or otherwise recasting that message by the one that follows the colon or semicolon, often waiting until the very last word of the second clause to spring the sentence's rhetorical trap. This is the classical form of the balanced sentence. The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries, intoned Churchill, pausing, no doubt, to let that final word sink in. We'll consider balanced sentences and balanced form more in the next lecture. This fifth and final strategy, with its specification of the importance of the semicolon and the colon, brings us face to face with a subject I've so far neglected: punctuation. More specifically, the confusion, complexity, and anxiety surrounding the use of colons and semicolons. Unless you have specifically researched the topic, unless you have Googled punctuation from every imaginable angle, unless you have wandered through the stacks of a large university library noting title after title offering definitive guidance for correct usage, you have absolutely no idea how many books have been published on the subject of punctuation. Just a few of the currently available books on punctuation are Lynn Truss's best-selling Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, Bill Walsh's Lapsing into a Comma, and Karen Elizabeth Gordon's The New Well-Tempered Sentence, a punctuation handbook for the innocent, the eager, and the doomed. These books specifically devoted to punctuation are joined by a whole raft of books devoted to English usage in general, but that also contain long sections on punctuation. Representative of this category would be Theodore M. Bernstein's Miss Thistlebottom's Hobgoblins, the careful writer's guide to the taboos, bugbears, and outmoded rules of English usage. Bernstein's more sober The Careful Writer, a modern guide to English usage. Bill Walsh's The Elephants of Style, a trunkload of tips on the big issues and gray areas of contemporary American English. Constance Hale's Sin and Syntax, How to Craft Wickedly Effective Prose. Karen Elizabeth Gordon's other popular writing guide, The Deluxe Transitive Vampire, the ultimate handbook of grammar for the innocent, the eager, and the doomed. And Patricia T. O'Connor's Woe is I, the Grammarphobe's Guide to Better English. Tips and comments on punctuation can even be found in such unexpected places as Lewis Thomas's The Medusa and the Snail, More Notes of a Biology Watcher, which contains a brief essay entitled Notes on Punctuation. Now, punctuation may not exactly be big business, but it apparently is a large enough source of anxiety for enough of us to support a cottage industry of punctuation guides. Okay, you may be thinking, all that may be so, but why are we being asked to think about punctuation now? The answer is pretty simple. While the cumulative sentence makes crucial use of commas, commas are pretty easy to use and pretty hard to misuse. Suspensive sentences, particularly long suspensive sentences, also make extensive use of commas. But the great majority of longer suspensive sentences would be impossible to parse without relying heavily on the semicolon and the colon. And semicolons and colons are not pretty easy to use and are distressingly easy to misuse. So a short digression. I think Lynn Truss has it exactly right in her Eats, Shoots, and Leaves when she says, using the comma well announces that you have an ear for sense and rhythm, confidence in your style, and a proper respect for your reader, but it does not mark you out as a master of your craft. But colons and semicolons, well, they are in a different league, my dear. First, the semicolon. My favorite description of the semicolon comes from Bill Walsh, copy desk chief at the Washington Post, who simply says, "The semicolon is an ugly bastard, and thus I tend to avoid it," possibly echoing novelist Donald Barthelme's feeling that the semicolon is ugly, ugly as a tick on a dog's belly. I'm not quite sure what Walsh and Barthelme find ugly about the semicolon, but those of us who aspire to write lengthy suspensive sentences or balanced sentences of any length don't have the luxury of avoiding semicolons. Remember the long suspensive sentence I used in the last lecture from Richard Hooker on faith, hope, and charity? It used 5 semicolons, in great part to separate clauses that contained a total of 12 commas. We realize that this is one of the easiest to understand uses of the semicolon. It helps avoid confusion in sentences that contain numerous commas. And remember that Hemingway suspensive sentence about Navarra? It contained 17 semicolons. In direct opposition to Walsh and Barthelme, celebrated biologist Lewis Thomas, author of the best-selling and highly respected The Lives of a Cell, explains his appreciation for the semicolon in his sequel collection of essays, The Medusa and the Snail. Here's what he says. I have grown fond of semicolons in recent years. The semicolon tells you that there's still some question about the preceding full sentence. Something needs to be added. It's almost always a greater pleasure to come across a semicolon than a period. The period tells you that that is that. If you didn't get all the meaning you wanted or expected, anyway, you got all the writer intended to parcel out, and now you have to move along. But with a semicolon, there you get a pleasant little feeling of expectancy. There's more to come, to read on. It will get clearer. Basically, a semicolon signals that some connection exists between what precedes it and what follows it, and pretty much leaves it to the reader to figure out the exact nature of that relationship. Generally, when used between clauses in a compound sentence, a semicolon suggests a more complicated relationship than do conjunctions such as and. A semicolon signals the kind of conceptual reversal that follows adversative conjunctions such as however or nonetheless. And finally, a semicolon also signals a degree of relationship indicated by conjunctions such as moreover or similarly. For our purposes in writing suspensive sentences, the semicolon serves to mark divisions in the sentence among syntactic units syntactic units within which commas are used. As Karen Elizabeth Gordon sums up things in her The New Well-Tempered Sentence, A semicolon comes between closely related independent clauses that are not linked by a coordinating conjunction. Extended clauses that contain commas certainly need a semicolon if a period is not wanted, but brief independent clauses might also be most appropriately separated with the soft pause this symbol holds. And for our purpose in writing the specific type of suspensive sentence that is the formally balanced sentence, the semicolon is that hinge in the middle of the sentence, a kind of mirror that reverses some important part of what comes before. Ask not what your country can do for you, semicolon. Ask what you can do for your country. To err is human, semicolon. To forgive, divine. Now the colon. Colons may have gotten a bad reputation as almost required components in the titles of academic publications, a phenomenon sometimes disparagingly referred to as the post-colonic surge. But the colon is a surprisingly emotional mark of punctuation. Lewis Thomas, for instance, doesn't like colons because he finds them bossy, pointing your nose in a direction you might not be inclined to take if left to yourself, or he finds them condescending, suggesting you need help to keep track of the writer's points. We've already seen how the colon can add emphasis to the final word in a suspensive sentence, as in what worried me most was this, colon, dying. We also know that the colon signals that some sort of explanation or enumeration is coming, that what follows the colon will break down or inventory something announced before the colon. They brought strange gifts, colon, spice from the east, gold from the new world, and a thirst for revenge from the depths of their savage hearts. As Fowler puts it in modern English usage, his own prose and punctuation paralleling his explanation, the colon, quote, has acquired a special function, colon, that of delivering the goods that have been invoiced in the preceding words. Karen Elizabeth Gordon devotes more thought to the affective promise of the colon, observing, there's something assertively expected about a colon, setting up both the reader and the sentence. It would be heartless and unfaithful to let either one down. She goes on to say, this is what I mean. What follows the colon further explains, illustrates, or restates with precise, embellished, or loquacious variation the words leading up to the colon. This is so often the case that if the goods are not delivered, you deserve to feel betrayed. Forthcoming is the colon's middle name. Also describing the colon in starkly emotional terms, Lynn Truss suggests that the colon rather theatrically announces what is to come. She adds, quote, like a well-trained magician's assistant, it pauses slightly to give you time to get a bit worried, and then efficiently whisks away the cloth and reveals the trick complete. For now, I simply wanted to note that suspensive or periodic sentences make heavy use of semicolons and colons, and as is the case with syntax in general, they deserve and reward so much more serious thought than most of us have ever given them.